We recently got a chance to talk to David Staats, the original designer of Galactic Seasons. We'll give you some of the background commentary on that and more on this episode of the SWTOR podcast from newoverlords.com. Our broadcast astromech today is EPC 460. And co-hosting this thing with me here is Seema. Hello there, Seema. How's it going?
Hey, hi, and hello, Max. It's going pretty well. Well, it's actually going really well right now because we are in the middle of total galactic war, and we have invaded the planet of Osus.
Yes, we
And
have.
so far, we're doing great. We're doing really good.
Yeah.
We're, I don't know, 10 or 13. Yeah, 14 million ahead of the next. But I'm not saying we have it in the bag because that is Jinx territory right there.
And
I'm
as
not
you
saying
said to
that.
me earlier, you're not superstitious, but you're a little stitious.
Yes, I am a little stitious.
Little stitious. So
as a child, I never wanted to step on the cracks.
No, and not because, my rational mind
Right.
would think that there would be any problem with it, but still, it's a thing, and you just don't.
I mean, it's like that line in the song, I know there ain't no heaven, but I pray there ain't no hell.
Exactly.
And that's, nothing to do with anything. But so, yeah, that's what I've been doing this week. So last week, to prepare, one of the things I did was I created 3 new characters because leveling during the low levels garners a lot of conquest points because you get points every time you do a mission story, and there's a bunch of mission stories, back to back to back to back to back in those lower levels. You get points every time you level. You get points for every 5 levels. And then there's just other stuff too. So like you get points for every time you do for the first time you do a mission on a planet, and you get points for killing 25 and then killing 50. It just racks. So basically what I'm getting to is, so I've done that on one character so far, leveled from 1 to around, no, from 10 to around, I think he's 31 or 32. And that's gotten me about somewhere between 800 and 900 thousand conquest points, and I'm sure I'll be, over a million on him before the weekend's over. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. On my main, I also have over a million points, and that is because of all the things we've been doing as a guild,
Right.
which has been really fun. Last night we had lots of groups. I think we had 5 groups running uprisings last week because uprisings also give lots of conquest points.
Yes. When you do the weeklies, it's 3 story mode and 3 veteran are 2 separate weeklies, and you're getting points for doing each of them separately. So yes, that was about a little over 300,000 points per
But
person.
yep. And then tonight on our ops team, we did a veteran mode EV and a group finder, um, explosive conflict, and that's another, sort of big chunks of. But really, the most points comes from everybody just doing stuff all day and
Yep.
all night. So, um, yeah, we had a lot of people online doing things, and yeah, it just really adds up. And so what I was starting to say about preparing last week is I made these 3 characters, um, but I'm going to hold off on the other 2 unless we need points on the weekend. We get in a situation where we need points, because then I'll have them ready for the next Total Galactic War.
Right. Right. I still have one left over from last time.
So yeah, I mean, Total Galactic War. That's what I've been doing this week. How about you, Max?
I have been doing all of the Total Galactic War as well, of course. So yeah, as you said, our open world stuff, I think we did Rampage on every planet. It was possible to do
Yeah, that's
Rampage on
right.
Tuesday. So that was just because we had a group of people, so we wanted to do something all together. But Stask and Machete and Quinn and helping lead some groups there to do everything last night to get a bunch of people. And then the other ops team, our usual Wednesday night ops team, broke up into 2 groups. That was the 5 groups for uprisings. Getting everybody through both of those weeklies was a ton. It was crazy. So we waited a little bit. I felt a little bad because we got in a little bit late. I mean, it was still just Wednesday instead of Tuesday, but we came in after End of Times joined in Wednesday afternoon and put, they had like 9 million points, and then we came in with like 11 or 12 after they already invaded and picked Osis as a planet that was looking tasty. Then we jumped in and jumped right ahead of them, and then had the big night last night. And now we're almost double their points and continuing to maintain that lead of about double. So it's looking good unless somebody else jumps in, which is why we wait a little bit. But a bunch of the big guilds have already picked, so that's another thing we're looking for. And it's been fun. This is a fun thing to do. This is an activity.
Yeah. And I appreciate the big guilds, hopping in early so that we can make a strategic decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sanctuary is relatively good about how they handle
Yeah.
what they're going to go.
They
Focus
leave
on
room
that.
for guilds like us to.
Yeah. Other guilds are not so much. I think there's another guild that's just trying to win every planet and just block out everybody. But I don't think they're going to be able to. Is it Galaxy Force? Is that the new one? Yeah. Galaxy Force, which is winning like 3 planets so far now. They're just one of those Conquest Guild 4 planets. Yeah. So we'll see. But that's the thing. That's the way they play. So that's the way they play. It's a game.
Yeah.
That's what I've been doing. That's what we've been doing. Let's check what's been going on in the news.
Now, an Imperial News Network report.
So first up in the news, this showed up in Twitter. Let me pull up the tweet officially. We can show it here. I don't know what is actually going on, but the tweet said, "Hey, we will be closing the public test server at 9:30 a.m. Central today." And this is today, Thursday, when this podcast is going out and getting recorded. Thank you to everyone who logged on and participated in 64-bit testing. I don't know. I asked around. Did the PTS come back up in the past week?
I don't know. I didn't think so.
I double checked in the dev tracker. I double checked in their Twitter feed. I did not see anywhere that the PTS came back up, or that they were asking anyone to test, or that they were doing any testing. But maybe it did, or maybe this tweet is weird or late, or I don't know. But PTS is down. That's about the only news. However, the PTS shutting down and being done is one of the signals that we look for to say, okay, well then how far are we away from the release of 7.2.1? And now obviously there could be more things they discover, and then there's more work that they need to do with the localization and things like that. But as a result, as Seema will talk about next in our community news, we do have a little contest running to see if anyone can guess the exact date that it actually releases. It's not the date that they announce, but we also said as soon as they announce or get close, and I think we're kind of close enough now because we're getting past some of the first guesses, we're going to lock that contest down. So tell us about the contest, Seema, and we can figure out.
Yeah. So basically, the contest is just to guess what the release date is going to be for 7.2.1. And I'm scrolling through it right now, and you're right. There are some guesses that have already passed.
Like mine, which was yesterday.
Yeah, and I think next week too, which would have been a 3/21 guess, I think that's technically kind of passed already too, because typically we would have heard by now if they were going to do it
right
on Tuesday. But you never know. But yeah, we need to close it down because otherwise, people could start guessing now. They know it won't be the 14th.
Right.
So when should we give people another chance to guess? Not a second chance.
I think by the end of the
haven't.
weekend,
Okay.
sometime on Sunday, we'll just close it.
Yeah.
We'll give people one last guess. And there's a 30-day subcode is what we're giving away. So jump in there. If you're interested in this game we call Star Wars: The Old Republic, that's newoverlords.com/Discord. Thank you, chat room. We I had a bunch of issues again today. It does not always, but today was an issue laden day. I had to reboot my studio PC a couple times because I moved it downstairs, and Discord did not like getting starting up today. So it just could not hear my audio until I shut down completely. A reboot didn't even work. But the chat room is always there to let us know when audio is coming through on Discord, how our balance is. That's one of the key services that they provide that we really appreciate. The number one service is being cool, fun people and hanging out with us. So we really appreciate that too. We will catch up with all of you after the show, which we do a little bit as well. For the show, after the show, that's all live on twitch.tv/newoverlords if you have not caught us live on Thursday nights. But you can also look at the VODs, and then the main episode, start to finish, goes up on YouTube, of course. But thank you very much, team there. We've got some fun stuff to talk about, so let's get right to that.
Bet you didn't see this coming!
We got to have a little interview with someone that we've been connected to for a little while and admiring for a while, David Staats. So for those of you that don't know David worked for BioWare for quite a while. He actually worked for BioWare and then left and came back to BioWare, and then he was at BioWare in some fun times doing some fun things around Shadow of Revan to about Galactic Season 2. He's the original designer of Galactic Season 2, and that's what we made the main content of our interview with him. So we interviewed him for our Behind the Games show. So if you want the full episode, you'll want to go to Behind the Games, which is newoverlords.com also. It's just right up there. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to take a couple of the key points out of there, because, I mean, we're talking about Galactic Seasons and SWTOR, but we're going to take a couple of the key points and just give a few more of our thoughts, a little bit of breakdown. And one thing we didn't talk to David about, which maybe we can brainstorm on, is what Seema and I want to see about out of future Galactic Seasons and how that might work. So, yeah.
In the interview for Behind the Games, we talked about his story, how he got into gaming, what games he likes to play, et cetera, et cetera. But tonight we're talking about specifically SWTOR stuff.
Yes, as we do with all of those Behind the Games episodes as well, we do hear a lot about the origin story of the people that we interview. So we did get a little bit of that, which was really fascinating from David too. Again, we won't get into too much of that here, but if you want to hear how he had like a burgeoning career just as a projectionist in movie theaters, and it was like doing that for a while he was living in Alaska, and then just decided that, you know, he'd talk to his friends, he was getting into games. It was a super cool journey and some bold moves on his part. I mean, if you want to hear how people make a career, he made his career. He got himself into BioWare by lining things up and preparing and making himself ready.
Yeah.
So let me go to our channel, because long-term arc, not that one, because I put chapter. I even put chapter markers in here. So as we go through, we can flip through, show a couple things. One other thing, again, we won't play this part, but he talked about his interview at BioWare, and this is more an industry thing. So Eflux, that's a good point too. And he's done interviews with other people before. I think Intisar did an interview with David a couple of years ago. But he started his degree in music and was potentially going to become a professional musician, and realized that he didn't want to do that because it's not as fun as it sounds. It's a job, as most jobs are. But his talking about interviewing as a systems designer and what that's like in the games industry, he had a design test, and this is what a lot of studios do, is there's this idea of a design test, and they'll give you a problem to solve, a game design problem, and you have to design the solution, talk about the implications, the caveats, the inputs and the outputs, and write up your approach to that problem as a product that you bring to the interview process, which I thought was really interesting. I'm much more familiar with coding interviews and coding challenges and getting up on a whiteboard and writing pseudocode and that kind of thing, and that's what I've done in my career. To hear a similar process on design is pretty interesting because you don't really have it's harder to show off a portfolio for a game designer because some of the things that are in your portfolio would be here's the thing I removed from the game that made it better. So let me show you
Right.
the lack of this thing in the game.
Right.
What are you going to do?
This would be my approach to increasing this thing in a game.
Right, right. He did talk about what he did before he was working on Galactic Seasons when he came back to BioWare after Shadow of Revan. One of the things he did is the Yavin Stronghold. He designed the Yavin Stronghold, which I think is awesome. So that's very cool. He worked a little bit on login rewards, of course, as the precursor. But let's jump to the part where he will give you a couple minutes of him talking about the start of Galactic Season, the thinking on Galactic Seasons, and some of the goals, and then we'll give our thoughts on that too. Goals for the login rewards. What do you got to say?
Galactic Seasons, and so that a lot of what Galactic Seasons was, we wanted the same. It tied into login rewards because it was once again wanting to drive engagement from players, but also we were trying to navigate different types of players, right? So promoting the idea of getting together and doing things together, but also allowing players to go out and do things on their own. But so a lot of the bones that the part with season 1 that I don't think we hit, which we addressed with season 2, was how you interact with the system on a day-to-day basis, which was the daily priority objectives is what I called them at that point. But I think the bones were there, right? So the reward track didn't change from season 1 to season 2. The way that you could potentially catch up in the system, the way that you could use cartel coins or your credits to interact with it, all of that, we'd set a lot of our kind of design philosophies right off the bat with that.
Yep.
And that was important to us to have multiple venues of interaction because again, we knew that it was going to be a longer system for each season. We knew how long each one was probably going to be. And we knew that that's a kind of a marathon of time.
Right.
And we wanted players to be able to, again, feel like they could take some time off and still come back and have that be meaningful.
Right. And not feel bad and not feel like they're missing out if they don't log in. All right. We don't need me talking. So yeah, that's how we kicked it off. And that was a good reinforcement for us of the things that we guessed. That was sort of the design of Galactic Seasons, which was that idea of laying out a set of objectives, getting people that sort of like get people into the game, get people to discover some of the parts of the game that they may not have discovered before. Those and build on the login rewards. That was sort of like the first stage was login rewards, just logging in. Then Galactic Seasons was the second stage. He goes a little bit further, I think, a couple minutes on into the full set of objectives. Any comments on sort of that origin of Galactic Season when he kicked it off after login rewards, Seema?
Well, basically, yeah. I mean, is he going to talk about? Are we going to clip some from?
No, I
season
guess
two?
let's just talk about it because
Yeah. Okay.
we don't need to play it all.
So, I mean, one of the things they realized during season 1, and they got a lot of feedback from players too, was that it was a little bit stressful because it was designed around the daily participation, and you did feel like if you didn't log in at least X number of days in a week, that you would get behind, that you would fall behind.
Yes.
And so they did make, based on that feedback and based on realizing that that was what was happening, it was kind of what he shared with us is it was like the kind of the opposite of what they wanted from the system. So they did a pivot for season 2 to make it more around the weekly targets.
Yeah.
And I remember between Galactic Seasons 1 and 2, when they told us they were doing that, I remember feeling like, I don't know how this is going to work. Galactic Seasons 2, it might leave me in the dust because the weekly targets from Galactic Seasons 1 were mostly PvP and flashpoints and stuff like that. And I I would feel a lot of pressure if I had to do X number of flashpoints a week. But that is, as we all know, that's not how it turned out. So
Right. Right. So that difference, and he said one of the things that was interesting. He said that like almost right away, as soon as they got season 1 out the door, very very early on, they realized what was happening and how some of this design was going to have to shift to optimize it. He did talk quite a bit about, and we'll play a little bit on it, about. We got into it with him a little bit. Should I play the part about the agency or the grinding, players grinding the fun away?
yes.
Let me clip into this.
In
In
daily,
everything,
which, yeah.
and players do this incessantly. If there is,
Yeah.
and we've argued this over the years in many games, if there is a more optimal way to do something, even if it's the most boring thing possible, there will be a significant subset of players that will go play the game that way, because you get done 2 seconds. You're doing a thing for 58 minutes instead of 60 minutes. Yes, my character has to smash their face into a brick wall instead of like flying spaceships around and having fun, but it's more efficient. So you would be dumb not to do it that way. And people,
Right.
how do you design around that? I mean, in anything, in balance of content and abilities and gearing, and how do you design away from players trending towards doing it the worst way possible, because
Yeah.
it's the because
Because then they go away with the idea that the game is boring.
right, because they
Yeah.
made it boring
Yeah.
for themselves.
Right.
It's a tricky thing to balance, and in some cases you just know that is the way that players will do it, and you give the player that amount of agency to make that decision for themselves.
Yeah.
But there are ramifications of that, and you're correct, because it means that a player could potentially burn themselves out, and that's what we don't want. As a designer and as a player myself, I don't like to engage with systems where I feel like, now I'm burned out, now I don't care, and I don't even want to deal with the game anymore. That's not good across the board, right? That now it could be a game that I love, and now I'm burnt out on it, so then that's sad. But then also as
Right.
a designer, if I have players who get to that point, that's sad for me as a designer, because
Yeah,
I want
right.
you to enjoy the design and to engage with it. So it's a tricky thing. And with season 1, I don't think we quite hit it. And so that portion of it was really our focus, and specifically my focus that I took out, because a lot of what my design philosophy was with Galactic Seasons was to be a system that didn't make you feel like you had to constantly go 100% at it.
Right.
But with the objective implementation, that ended up being the case, and players went to 100% on it. And I was like, no, don't do that. It's fine. You could take these days off. And so a lot of the feedback initially was, that we leaned super heavy into dark design patterns, and that hit me personally.
Because that's what you were trying to avoid.
That's what I was exactly trying to avoid, and inadvertently ended up with that same outcome. So I think it was within the first week of season 1 launching, I'd already began working on revising that specific aspect of season 2. So it was the very first thing that I took up. The objective system itself needs to change drastically, because it's causing a friction point that I do not want to continue to support.
Right. Yeah. So I think the key concept there is that idea that, and I still don't know how you can, and David suggests that in some ways you can't, stop players from engineering the fun out of certain things. Now, he has worked very hard to try to ensure that the objectives are designed in such a way that you can that it's difficult to engineer the fun out of things. But even our teams this week, is everyone doing only what's the most fun to try to win Total Galactic War? No. But we're still having fun, and nobody's doing something terribly unfun. So I think part of the design uh, solution to that is making sure that everything is still fun enough that if you're going to go do uprisings and you're just going to grind, you're going to go run uprisings 20 times this week. Well, then let's make sure that uprisings are also fun and not even have uprisings as an objective if they aren't fun. One of the things that he mentioned, which I've heard people suggest for any game studio, and they've suggested it of BioWare in the past too, is this idea of dark patterns. And I have heard, we heard this from Chris Schmidt when we interviewed Chris. We've heard this from David Staats. Their team is worked very hard to avoid at all costs any idea of dark patterns. And the worst of the worst dark patterns, no one has any argument that you could say that BioWare has tried to implement those with Star Wars: The Old Republic, because there's not pay to win, there's not gambling, those are the worst dark patterns. But the idea that you're doing things, you're presenting objectives that will trick the players into doing things that they don't like because you're trying to make them do something that you need them to do, that is not their objective. And was not their objective with any of the Galactic Seasons, and I think we all believe it continues to not be any of their objectives. What they want to do is make a cool, fun system that engages everyone and shows off some parts of the game that maybe you want to try out and gets you to group up with your friends, because when we're all playing together, it makes playing the game more fun. And
one of the things about Galactic Seasons 1 that, looking back on it, remember how you would get random targets, like you and I, for instance, wouldn't necessarily get the same targets.
Right.
So you couldn't
Yes.
even group together really to hit those targets. And their thinking when they did that was they didn't want to stress out any particular zone by sending everyone to that zone.
Right.
And
wreck things for the players that are around there, and wreck
yes.
things for you,
And I think what
because
they
you got
found
50
out
people.
in
Yeah.
season 2 that wasn't the result.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, as we found, it makes it very difficult for us to do what we do on our Tuesday nights, which is everybody all has the same objectives, and then we're going to go after them together.
Right. But we did try. We would do like 2 or 3 different versions of an objective.
Right. Exactly. All right, so he
and
goes.
I agree. Zen points out that giving players options is a good way to avoid burning them out. Yeah.
Yes, and that's what he talks about a little bit here coming up in not right after this part. So we'll go one more dip into the agency versus urgency, and then we'll go into the evolution of what happened in season 2, which is a lot of what you're talking about, Zen. So yeah, let's hit this. Jump right to here. Works well for us.
Yes.
But you've said a couple terms here, which I think are important, is the agency versus urgency, giving players agency, and in some ways, the bad terminologies, but the rope to hang themselves with, or the gun to shoot themselves in the foot with. You want to give them agency to be able to do it how they want, but if the objectives are there and everybody's feeling forced for whatever reason, even if it's not really forced, that maybe the objectives need to shift, but the agency being there to go about it how you like is something we all really enjoy. The fun that I've presented to myself.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that gets into this evolution, and then also the group content. So talk about that, the aligning the objectives, the getting rid of the randomization, and then us being able to group up on some of these bigger things and the point totals associated with them.
Yep. So there was the kind of like, again, the core skeleton was kind of there. We knew we wanted some daily, we wanted some weekly, but with season 1, it was favored at daily participation, with weekly being lesser. And so when I looked at how we shift this, all the points of feedback that I took, I want to be able to schedule my time with my friends, which means that we can't have randomized objectives, but that also could potentially run into the design challenge that we had with season 1 of if everyone has the same objective, they're going to clog these areas and then frame rate goes down and performance goes down in these specific areas. So how do we focus that? And kind of just as I worked through those problems, I realized the best solution was let's just make all of this a weekly. And that kind of ties into the login rewards as well. Here's your objectives for the week, and we'll give them to you at the beginning of the week, and you just have all week to do them at your own pace. And everyone's going to have the same objectives, and now you can align that time with your friends and figure out when you want. Are there specific objectives that you want to do on your own? Are there objectives that you want to do with your friends? And then we can schedule those out because we all have the same objectives.
Right.
But then we still wanted to encourage. It's still an MMO. We still want to encourage players getting together. We still want to encourage specific game modes, PvP, GSF, so on, like those. So everything was basically balanced out in its point distribution for time and effort required for a specific event. So if it was something like taking your companion to Tatooine and taking down 50 bugs or whatever, you could do that by yourself. It's something that we kind of time out how long would it take a specific player to take down 50 of these. And then based on that, this is what the point distribution is, but also determined how many of those enemies we were asking a player to defeat versus something like GSF, which is going to have a queue time, which requires multiplayer.
Right.
And so those, because it's multiplayer, because it has a queue time, that raises the challenge on it, that the potential to fail in a specific thing. And so that raises the balance points up a little bit more, which meant that the points for those specific objectives goes up. So that was kind of how I approached that specific aspect of it. But again, the whole goal was let's just flip all of this to give the agency to the player. Here's your objectives. You have a week to do them. And that's what drives that urgency, right? You do have time, but there is a point where these are going to go away.
Right. But yeah. So I think that agency, so the urgency comes because it's objectives throughout the week and there's the 100 levels of the track and you're trying to drive this opportunity to engage in some things now versus wait forever, which, I will always do if it hangs out there forever because I know I can just wait and not just do it someday. So driving a little bit of urgency is good, but then giving the players agency. I didn't hear us talk about it there, but there is a concept that we came up with through this discussion about giving you agency not only to do what you want to do, but especially with season 2 and season and beyond, not to do what you don't want to do, because you only have to do 7 out of 10. The way it's sort of flipped around for me is I get to pick the things I don't want to do because I'm going to plan on doing 7, and I can't even do number 8, 9, and 10. I get no credit for it in the system. And what that frees me up to do in my brain is pick which ones of the objectives that I don't want to do. And that's almost feels like more agency to me than making sure I get X number of objectives done or getting 6, even though if it's 6 or 7 out of 10. What are your thoughts on sort of the agency and feeling the amount of agency that we have in the systems now?
You were almost making a mini game out of it too by picking the ones or trying to pick the ones that were the 12-point objectives versus the 8-point ones. I appreciated the agency because it gave me basically carte blanche to do whatever I want, to leave out, like you said, the ones I don't want to do, and to just do the ones that I did want to do.
Yeah.
And the fact that they gave us 5 months meant that we could do it at a pretty leisurely pace too. I mean, you had to pay attention. Like you couldn't be just willy-nilly, I'll do a few here and there and expect to get to 100 at the end, but you could do willy-nilly a few each week.
Right. You could pick, yes. So you had enough agency because of the flex in the overall schedule to pick which weeks you were going to go hard at it and which weeks you were not, and take a vacation.
Some weeks I would get a lot of points because on our ops night, what we were doing would align with Conquest.
Right.
But it didn't have to though, so I could do my normal activities or you know, some of them were not completely normal. I mean, normal. I'm never normal, but um, yeah. So I could do if I didn't feel like it that week, I could just skip it.
Right. Right. And really appreciate that part of this system as well. One of the uh, one of the things we showed here, but sort of glossed over, is the grouping. And Galahard in the chat room suggested as well the grouping and being able to do things with a group. I think was a really good evolution in season 2 and continues to be. So everybody being spread out and doing different things. Yeah, I mean, in retrospect, that just seems like a really harsh way to go about those objectives. Being able to group up with your, and we probably recognize that right away. I think now that I'm thinking back to us talking about it. In fact, we have a couple episodes of this podcast where we talked about it specifically. I think we did an episode
Right.
about galactic seasons for each of the last 2 seasons, and we
And
talked about it on the side.
the thing about his realization that making them weekly targets would spread out the people enough that it wouldn't cause overload in the zones has really worked out to be true, because
Right.
there's a number of people, and we have some in the guild that just come in on Tuesday, knock out Conquest for the
Yep.
week. And then there's a natural surge of players in the evenings and in the weekends. And then there's people doing it at odd hours. And so it just, over time, it just spread out.
Yes. One of the things we asked him specifically, which we wondered, was multi-tag. You take something like multi-tag, and maybe we'll play a bit of it coming up. But the idea of multi-tag, was that designed for galactic seasons? Because now we're doing these things and we're all together in these big areas, and it was not, but it certainly took advantage of it. So it was another opportunity for multiple systems designs and things that they had been wanting to do for a while to come together and make everything better. I thought that was an interesting part of the discussion.
Yeah.
So let's get into a little bit of this. He talks a little bit more. I've got a note here about dark patterns and avoiding dark patterns, which again I think is important to understand that this is something they think really hard about. And anyone who says that BioWare hates the players and they're only doing this because of blah blah blah, that's not it. And this is the kind of stuff that sort of shows it in detail. And nobody really calls it this, but it's like light patterns. It's you as a designer, and it's the game, and we have talked about this in the past, is the game tricking you into having fun. And if the game tricks you into having fun, yes, you got tricked, but you had fun.
Right. Yeah.
That is something we've talked about a few times.
Right. If you get fooled into having fun, you had fun and enjoy it. And that's sort of the payoff. So have you really thought about that in terms of those light patterns? Here's a lever we can pull, and we can tweak it to the point where people are going to group up, and we know this is a fun thing to group up on. So we're gonna tweak it in that way, or have it just? I mean, is it less? I don't want to say nefarious, but less designed around a pattern which is going to produce these kinds of results in player behavior.
Yes. So it's not, I don't think it's as cognizant of us to think of that, because I think ideally we would just be hitting that, but it's very easy to fall into a dark pattern than it is to maintain out of it. And so at least when we were looking at galactic seasons, we were very cognizant of dark patterns and trying to avoid them. And if we felt that we were falling into it, we would purposely pull ourselves back out. But there are things, I think, such as one of the best points of feedback that I saw throughout both seasons was people saying, I've never really given GSF a try. I've now tried it because of galactic seasons, and now it's one of my favorite parts of the game. And that to me felt really, really great, because it's opening up a whole new section of the game for the player who, for whatever reason, maybe just never saw value in going to try it. And now that they've tried it, they have a whole other progression system that they could engage in, a whole nother game mode they could engage in, something else that they can meet other players in. So that was one of the highlights of seeing people say those types of things. And GSF was one of the stronger points of people saying, I've never really tried it, but now that I have, it's actually a lot of fun.
Yeah, we had several people in the guild who, became devotees because of Galactic Seasons.
Right. And we have a, once every other week or so. Yeah. I kind of like that idea of light patterns, which is game design at its core. You're always trying to design the game for people
Like
to have fun.
he talked about wanting player engagement, but what that really means is trying to make the game fun so people want to engage themselves with it.
Because they play it and they have fun and they know what is fun, and they've also done a lot of work to make some fun things that maybe you've never heard of. This week, we're getting back into Uprisings, and we're probably going to do a podcast episode about Uprisings coming up, especially now that we've sort of been grinding them out and remembering what's there and how they work. And we did story mode and veteran, and I think one of the groups was doing master mode Uprising, so maybe we'll get a couple of those in. But this idea that, okay, well, there's a bit of content in the game that maybe you've never tried or never heard about. What if we made that an objective and gave you a little reward if you try it out? There's a few different ways that games are doing these days that I think is really interesting. And Star Wars, SWTOR, I think could potentially even go further. So I'll describe that in a second.
Yeah, I don't know how they could do it, but like one area for me that I really haven't touched at all is decorating strongholds. And something like Galactic Seasons would get me into it. I'm quite sure. And I think I would enjoy it. It seems like such a big sort of looming thing. I have like literally thousands of decos at this point.
That's interesting. That's a tougher one.
Yeah.
Because
me personally, they're not going to get me into PvP or GSF.
Right.
But I'm me.
Right.
Someone else might try it and love it, but I've been through PvP in my life. I know what I don't like about it and what I find not rewarding about it. So yeah.
There is one conquest objective where it's like pick up and put down a decoration 5 times, but all you do is go click, 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 and it's done.
Right. I don't know how they would incent me to
actually decorate. Yeah, that would be difficult. I think one of the problems with that is in Star Wars, there's no outcome. There's no game impact for decorating versus not decorating. Right. Whereas in other games, like a survival game, when you're building something, you might need to build up your defenses because, creatures will come and attack your base. Okay, well, then obviously the game design is incented for you to actually build it. Because if you don't, it will get smashed. So that's interesting. How they would do that, maybe some extrinsic kind of activity like decorating contests or send screenshots of your but I don't know if that's going to incent you.
I know. And like I know maybe put it on, I don't know how, I literally don't know, but that's an area of the game that I could get into that I haven't.
Right. So yeah, I think this was sort of just that interesting part of those design patterns. One of the things that other games do that I was going to mention that I would maybe be interested in seeing them do for SWTOR is a journal type system, especially for new players. But it can go all the way through endgame, which is a journal and a series of steps and goals and objectives. And maybe sometimes some games do it where the later parts of the journal don't even unlock until you finish all the earlier parts of the journal. And it's, you could kind of think of it as achievements, but they're not like super challenge mode achievements. They're basic things like, unlock a room in your stronghold. Okay, because when you do this thing, you'll see what it is. You'll see what it does. Queue up for a GSF match. Okay, well now, get to level 80 with a character. Now it's like a journey, and you're in your journal. Now you check that thing off. Okay, now that you're level 80, go to this vendor on the fleet and buy a piece of 336 gear. Oh, now the journal sort of like leads you through this process and checks things off your list that also teaches you as you go along. I think we asked him if by doing things within the season, have they thought of that, of laying out a season, which they sort of haven't done yet, to teach players the game. And maybe in the way that I sort of was thinking of that is, could you, in maybe the first couple weeks of the season, say GSF was going to be a component of it. So, again, if anybody doesn't want to play GSF, you just make it so they don't have to play GSF. But if you're going to do the GSF parts of the season, then the first few weeks, it's just queue up for a match. And you get credit if you get in, you can crash 5 times, you can do whatever you want. And then the week after that, the objective is slightly different. And maybe it's the instructional piece of it. Now you need to queue up for a match, and you need to just target 3 different enemies. Oh,
Right.
now suddenly I realize that targeting is a thing. And I need to target. Oh, what's the button to now? Okay, press E to target the player. Oh, that's why none of my shots were landing, because I didn't target anything. Oh, okay. So if you made those objectives across that season journey, so that at rank 90 to 100, it's do 50,000 damage and kill 10 ships. And if anybody's doing the GSS stuff, they just have learned it along the way, that it's now they're just like GSF pilots, and it could be very cool for them. Upgrade one of your components, change out one of your co-pilots, all of those things that you could be teaching them along the way. I think that would be really cool. So yeah, but he said they haven't done that yet. To that degree. They did a couple things where they introduced a couple things in the first couple weeks, but didn't really take it much further than that.
I think it's an interesting idea, because one thing about Star Wars: The Old Republic, especially if you come from an MMO background, is it's very easy to learn how to play it. But what that means is moving around the world and shooting things.
Yeah.
And you're talking about a layer or multiple layers of sophistication on top of that. You're talking about what are the other things that the game has to offer besides killing things.
Right. And for SWTOR, and any game that does this and has sort of a system that's not the same thing that you play in all the other MMOs, those are the things you're going to have to work harder to introduce people to, so that they can understand how the system works. And I play a lot of survival games, and each survival game has its own twist of systems of how they work. And they do need to walk you through it. And there need to be these kind of tools or journaling or systems so that you can figure out, okay, I see what you're doing here. In your game, you've got this kind of effect. These raids happen on this scheduled basis, and I'm going to need to do this kind of defending to survive against it. That's interesting. But you need to teach them. Something like GSF, you're absolutely right, is not something, if you played Final Fantasy and WoW and ESO, that you could come to Star Wars and know what GSF is. You're not going to know it all. So it's definitely one of those things. But even PvP between different games is pretty different. So having a way to introduce people to it slowly, explain the different game types. You got something like Hotball for SWTOR is going to be very different than game modes that people have experienced in other games. Another opportunity to sort of teach and design systems and approaches and introduction and tools that the player has available to them, and things like Galactic Season and achievements that teaches the players where the fun is that they might be interested in, and lets them engage in that fun if they want to. Why don't we wrap up with this part, which is a little bit of the discussion of designing for player cooperation, which I thought was interesting for him to hear, and has implications for the way MMOs are designed and a bunch of games are designed.
Long time too, eternally. But no, something like shared tagging wasn't actually added for Galactic Seasons. It was something that I knew was coming because all of us we'd all wanted this to be something. The whole point of it was we really wanted to remove the friction that was happening between players, because in an MMO, other players should not be your enemies; they should be your friends.
Yes.
And so what we were seeing a lot, and especially with new players who don't know any different, was you would come on to Tython, let's say, and you'd find a mob and you'd start running over to them, and then someone who's just farming or whatever would force sleep into
Right.
that mob and take them all out. And you're like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm going this way now.
Yeah.
And it kind of immediately makes that other player
The enemy.
a competitor and the enemy, which and they never should be, right? That's not what the behavior that we want to entice. And so we knew we wanted to go over to shared tagging because we wanted to remove any friction points of players interacting with each other. So if I'm taking down an enemy and someone else comes and joins, it only benefits me because it makes the fight go by quicker. And now maybe I spark up a conversation with this player, and who knows what comes from that. But it's in a positive frame of mind as opposed to sparking up a conversation with them hostily and be like, you took my kill, right? So we knew that was something that we definitely wanted to do. And then because I knew that was coming in, that helped enforce how I wanted to set up the objective for those specific things to help bring players together at those points.
The playing off of each other, those features playing off of each other makes a ton of sense.
Yeah,
I see that as kind of a shift too, because there was an idea in MMOs that friction was a type of player engagement and not
Alliance
to
versus
necessarily
Horde.
to be avoided. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the days of EverQuest 2, right?
Yeah.
You wait around for that lion in the common lands to spawn for your heritage quest, and it's 4 hours spawn, and then spawns and someone else hits him before you do, and you're like,
Yeah.
I want to smash everything.
Feels bad. It feels bad, and you're mad at that person. We did an interview a few weeks ago with a small indie studio that's making this idea. It was interesting to hear him say and to think about this idea of designing for cooperation and cooperative play.
And we didn't, even though they did do multi-tag, I didn't really know that they had that as a goal.
Right. And
I mean, when we heard it from another developer, we thought, oh, that's great. All games should be that way. But it wasn't. I mean, BioWare has already been thinking that way.
But not all games. I mean, and I don't think you're saying all games either. There are fighting games. There's battle games, and the thing is, in my mind, those games are really good at player versus player. You have strategic play. You have things like League of Legends. You have fighting games like, just the straight up 1v1 fighting games. You have a lot of those. You have games like Rust that are designed around squads of players fighting each other. But
I do sort of mean all games, but go ahead.
Well, I don't think you would say the people that want to play a fighting game shouldn't have a game to play. But MMOs, do you think chess should be?
Yeah, I stopped playing chess for this reason.
Well,
because I don't want to engage with people in a way that I have to be the winner or they have to be the winner. So, and I don't believe that adds anything good to the human condition.
Okay, I think that's a bold position and a position to take. I mean, there's a lot of competition that's sort of part of the human experience. I think in a fun way too. Sport, any kind of sport, basketball, football, baseball.
People think that, but yeah, I don't know that it's.
I
know there's a lot of rhetoric around how competition makes this and makes that, but I'm not so sure.
Yeah. If we don't go as far as saying there should be no fighting games, I think it's a bold move to say, hey, and we now have a couple situations here where game designers are saying, hey, in my game, I want it to be the case where when you encounter someone out there, when you encounter someone in the world, in this open world, that it should be an opportunity for something neutral to positive. and hopefully very positive and a very, very fun, cooperative, interesting, engaging thing. There are psychological studies out there that these kinds of games, these online experiences that we play, when we do things together and achieve an objective together, that it's a stickier experience. It feels better. It brings us back. It creates a home for us, psychologically and mentally. So we had our interview with Corborn and the makers of that game, and that's going to be a survival game with zero PvP. It's all the opportunity for cooperative things and interesting things to happen. And if you help another player, it might also help you, even through the game system design. Here in an MMO, when I encounter something out in the world, I like it when MMOs have designed their world such that you don't even get these unintended bits of competition, like going for a gathering node that's on the ground. The games that do it the best, I feel, are where that gathering node exists for me and the other player, and we each can gather it, and it's not I have to race to it and somebody's going to take it from me, or somebody stole my kill, or the tagging. Somebody tagged the world boss before us, so now we are not going to get credit for the thing we're trying to get credit for. All of that kind of thing feels bad, and it doesn't even feel very good when you win, because you're just picking up a piece of thing off the ground, and it definitely feels bad when you lose, even though it was just a thing off the ground. So designing away from that, I think, is a really positive move for those types of games. As far as having a place for competition and fighting and battle games, fine. I think I think that can exist. I think MMOs aren't a great place for it. It's just because MMOs and the way MMORPG is designed, you're never going to be able to have a well-balanced, perfectly aligned, perfectly balanced PvP system.
I mean, you can surround yourself with people who challenge you and who help you hone your skills without there having to be a winner and a loser.
Right. Yes. And you can create those kind of challenges for your players. But if you want a perfectly balanced PvP experience, go play something like Overwatch, because it's designed for that.
Right, it has the tools for that kind of balance,
and it has the tools for the designers. It's a much simpler game in a lot of ways. It's designed around the balance of the characters, and they continue to tweak balance, but they can tweak balance at like the minuscule level, where here tweaking balance too much might make a character or a class not work well for PvE. It might provide a lot less build variety for players to be able to like play a role in the game. So all of those kinds of aspects are very difficult to balance around, and the sheer volume of specs and players and types and faction and utilities and gear and is an order of magnitude or multiple orders of magnitude more than something like Overwatch. So trying to balance that is just an impossible math problem. So yeah, those are the kind of things we talked about. And, quite a bit.
And more.
And more. So if you want the full interview, you can get to it at newoverlords.com. It's just right up there, or YouTube/newoverlords for the video. That's where this video, I was just playing it off of our YouTube channel. At the end here, we did let David give us a tour, which you could go through and listen to, of what he's got on his walls. He's got a couple signed posters. He's worked at a couple other game studios. That's what the posters right behind his head is from one of the other studios that he was working on. He got all of his coworkers to help sign that when they released one of their games. He did talk about Baby Yoda and how Baby Yoda was basically a project lead at BioWare at the time. So I thought that was fascinating. And it's got a couple of his guitars back there. And then, we asked him what games he likes to play. And one of the games that he mentioned, which I was very happy to hear about, was the We Were Here series. That was cool.
That was.
So We Were Here, we did an interview about 9 months ago now, one of our earlier interviews after PAX East last year with Lucia de Visser and the We Were Here Forever game had just came out, and that's her.
Mayhem
She's the
Games.
what's that?
Mayhem Games.
Mayhem. Yeah. So Mayhem is the studio, and they do the We Were Here series. It's a cooperative game, and you can only play it cooperatively, which is interesting. You have to have 2 players, no more, no less. Is how that works, and basically it's a puzzle game. So you're getting into environments. It's 3D first person view for you. Seema and I played it a little bit. It was kind of fun. It was fun to hear. I love asking that from anyone of anybody from any studio, and we asked Chris Schmidt that, and we asked Ashley that, the kind of games that people play, and I think it's interesting because they wouldn't be in this industry if they didn't like games. Well, you hope, and we haven't found one yet of an actual creator that's in it. Sometimes we wonder about the executives.
I mean, what was interesting is both Schmidt and Stott both said all kinds of games. Like they didn't say, "Oh, I prefer this kind or that kind,"
Right.
which was really, I can't even imagine that. Like that kind of blows my mind.
Yeah,
Like I really only play certain kinds of games.
David said he's been playing a bunch of Marvel Snap, for example, and that's a
Yeah.
deck builder card game. Collectible Marvel themed, really interesting from a game design perspective. So there's just fun things to see in that way that I think might really be interesting to somebody like David, but it's also just a really engaging game in a lot of ways. So, all right. Well, it's always fun to talk to people in the games industry. That's why we have our other podcast, but also to talk to people about Bioware because we spend so much time and have spent so many years. So we've
spent so much. Galactic Seasons is such a big part of our play these days. Yeah.
It's huge. People have commented on this YouTube video. I think there's only a handful of comments, but one of the comments was one of the best. Feels it's one of the best things that was added to the game, and in a lot of ways, it does pull you in. It provides you sort of those opportunities for things to do, and if a game is too open, too much of a sandbox, and I've played a lot of sort of just full on sandbox games. If it's too much of a sandbox, then with no objectives and no input, nothing, then you just sort of maybe get bored or you have nothing to do. And yes, you could like build up your house or whatever, or pick up another
That's like when
stick off the ground.
We were playing Coreborn together, and I which is not even that's much of a sandbox. But at one point, I just said to Jeff, I said, I'm bored now.
What do I do?
He goes, yeah, what am I supposed to do here? And he's just like, okay, Seema, it's a sandbox here. Try this and try that. It's like, because I didn't have any ideas of my own.
And they haven't yet implemented anything that was the journal to like walk you through. Here's sort of what would come next, something you might want to explore. There's definitely going to be urgency in that game, and the urgency is the town attacks.
Right.
And once you hear, hey, there's going to be some big monsters coming to stomp on your little house that you built here, you might want to do something about that. Okay, now we have urgency, and we've created an objective. So now we're going to think about what we might want to do about it. And what did you do, Seema? I think we all just chopped down trees quite a bit.
Well, I had been chopping down, I think bushes were about my speed at that point. Because I didn't really get how all the pieces work together.
Yeah.
And I can see that happening, when a game like that goes live. If you play it with friends, I'm going to have to play it with friends, because actually the part where you figure out how everything works is not fun for me. That is the part where I just feel like I'm beating my head against the desk.
Yeah.
And I get sort of frustrated and angry.
And it needs to walk you through it a little bit easier, especially for people that
you need to
play that kind of game.
have your friends who say, come over here. Here, let me hand you this. And do this now.
Yeah. And just come with us. We're going to go get a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be, 100% hand holding, but just a little bit of a, oh, this is what you do.
Yeah. So
So
Star Wars, The Old Republic, we've been playing it for 10 years now. And look at what Total Galactic War and Conquest is doing for us both last week and this week. Last week, we are like driven to do a whole bunch of things to prepare. This week, we're driven to do a whole bunch of things to get points. It's a system that's designed to it's a light pattern that's tricking us into having fun. And
right,
we
and it
appreciate
only
that in a good
for
way.
us it only happens a few times a year.
Yeah. And the seasons have a long enough span of time that you don't have to focus on it 100%. And all of these kinds of patterns out there to keep you engaged are nice and fun. And that's what we like in a game. All right. I think anything else then before we wrap it up, Seema?
Nope. I think that's good.
All right. I think we can chuck EPC 460 droid out an airlock to broadcast this episode out there to everyone. All the feed and subscribe links are on newoverlords.com and YouTube/newoverlords for the videos, of course. You can also come chat with us in our Discord, which is newoverlords.com/Discord. If you want a feed of updates of when things are going live or when a new video is produced, you can follow on Twitter @MaxTheGray or our channel handle, which is @TheNewOverlords, and we'll keep you up to date there too. For AIE Alea Iacta Est Guild information and to join our guild, we are on Starforge and we play a ton of games. We play all these survival games too. You can check out our guild and everything that we've got going on at aie-guild.org. You really want to go to the Discord link, which is on that page right now. I think it's sort of right in the middle. And jump in there. Jump in our SWTOR section. In our SWTOR channel, we've got guilds on both the Imperial and Republic side. This week's an Imperial week, but we switch back and forth. Jump in there. We would love to get you an invite. We'd love to have you in. And with that, we will talk to you soon.
Later, everyone.